Hello everyone, thanks to the power of the internet I gotta talk with you all, and this time, you all might think you watched this. Well, you might have. If you're one of the 10 people who noticed I uploaded earlier today, I forgot audio. And the original ones didn't have it. I hate OBS sometimes. But, I'm getting sidetracked. Everyone, put on your Sokea cooking hats. Cause we finally have reveals of the actual effects of Magnolia Patriarch. And from this alone, they gave 3 other cards, 4 technically, of support. And I could literally cry, because they gave me exactly what I wanted. This is Elder. This is just Elder on grade 3. And we have playable turns. Magnolia. King Magnolia can return. This can be a meta contender again. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What does this do? I don't read Japanese, but I've committed all these cards to memory now, just because I'm so excited. So what does this do? When it's placed on Van, you can call a Sylvan Horned Beast specifically from drop to rear. So unlike Elder, who uses it from soul, this one does it from drop. It's pretty easy to accommodate that. Next, it has a continuous. You know, if your opponent's grade 3, everything gets 5k, except Magnolia, because, you know, a true king supports his people, and not himself. And whenever you Persona Ride, you get Dry +1. You can also just intercept. And also you can just intercept whenever. So that might seem like a hindrance, but it's actually not. Because if you're going first, your opponent's grade 2, and has to take the brutality of your assault, and you're thinking, oh, my rear guards are stuck there. Well, they eventually have to ride up anyway, meaning they're grade 3, which it gives everything plus 5k immediately, because this is a continuous. And funny enough is, you get Dry +1, I guess, continuous active on your opponent's turn too, which is really funny. But however, the most important thing is this act ability. Counterblast 1, this is a main phase ability, please, love of God, remember this. Like, I used to forget like Magnolia's, because it was after your attack for Counterblast 1, and I would just get too ahead of myself. But please don't be the person who plays Magnolia and forgets to do the Magnolia thing, because it's a main phase ability. But you choose up to your opponent's grade of units. Shout out to things like Androld, who does the same thing. And they can attack from back row. Pretty cool, pretty based. However, this ability is actually free. So this Magnolia really doesn't have any single cost attached to it whatsoever. But we'll get into that in its support. So what does it actually look like? Well, they've turned Inlet into a grade 2. Why? I don't know, but I'll take it. And this thing is actually really easy and cool to see at any point in the game, because it just gets a power boost if you have a grade 3, so once again can rush your opponent being a 15k attacker. And even if you're on like Patriarch or Elder, is 20k compared to Inlet being at an awkward 18. But also, if something just attacked from the back row, so if you're playing this deck, you can activate its end of turn to throw it into Soul and draw a card, so it's Inlet. Except it's not required to attack at a certain amount of time, or attack from back row, which makes a lot of important deck decision builds, because there's a lot of things that actually just want to be in the back row for their effect to activate. So this being able to be anywhere is pretty awesome. Next, we have something is okay. It's a common. It's basically if you have a grade 3, this can intercept, it gains intercept, and 5k shield. So sadly, in terms of just Patriarch and Elder, you still can't intercept within Larvgulf because you have to have intercept. Nothing gives it intercept. So this unit giving itself intercept's pretty nice. It's pretty okay. But also, if you are a grade 3 or greater, when this thing attacks from back row, it gets plus 10k. So it's a 28k attacker. It's just a little slow. But you know, that's entirely fine. For what it is, it's decent. Now, Remember when I said things were free? They gave us another Golbat. They gave us a Maple. What is this thing? This adorable thing only has abilities when in drop. And if you are a grade 3 Vanguard, when it's placed. The first one is you can call it to a rear guard, and this unit gets plus 5k. So getting a free 15k unit's pretty alright. And considering when Magnolia is placed already, you get a free unit from drop. And if that so happens to be like Banatsby, well, Banatsby Soul Blast out this, Counter Blast, call something else. This thing gets called. You got 3 units for placing a single Vanguard. And very little cost, mind you. But however, this second effect, it tucks itself into Soul. And remember that act ability that says Counter Blast 1? You don't have to pay it. You don't have to pay your taxes, which is great. And don't forget, you can activate both of these effects if you have multiple of them in drop. So, like, free unit, free Counter Blast, basically. So nice. And the main reason, you don't need to run Alpin. Like, Alpin is kind of cringe because it binds itself for a counter charge and soul charge. But, you know, with this thing going in soul, with Inlet going in soul, which what I'm lovingly going to call this thing, you get so much soul in this deck, it's absolutely criminal. That it's just a free resource now. So, there's really no cost. And if you're running Alpin, you're running it because it gets big power and it's a beat stick. However, I'm sidetracking myself. That's a rant for just another time, another place. But there's another non-Sylvan Horn that we got prior to Patriarch, prior to these new 3 Sylvan Horn. We got an actual, we got a Cycler. I know this is also Leonorn, so fighting against them for this promo is going to be a little hard. I think Magnolia uses this better, but what does it do? Well, when you discard it during your ride phase, you can either Soul Blast or Energy Blast 3 and draw a card. Now the thing about Magnolia, which is kind of one of the reasons we use it better, is what my tangent was talking about. You don't have to Energy Blast 3 for this. It's actually more advantageous to Soul Blast with this unit. Why? Well, it's not like you're using the grade 0 or 1 in your build, and the grade 2 can Soul Blast himself out, Lattice for effect. So you're filling your drop with Sylvan Horn, which if you're getting pretty bricked up, you can call Lattice off of Magnolia's effect. And if it's from back row, it's 15k. And if your opponent's grade 3, it's 20k. It's not the world's best thing to call off of it, but it is there and can facilitate it by itself. Or you can just discard this, Soul Blast it out, and draw a card off of it. But more importantly, that other effect that activates and drop, you put it to the bottom of the deck and one of your units gets its original power set to 15k. 20k if you've Persona Road. Now the fun thing about this is now this helps Magnolia hit numbers, because we have a lot of specifically good grade 1s. That setting to 20k, if you have Sorol, is now 30k, but because Patriarch gives plus 5, for putting this to the bottom of the deck, you turn something that's 8k into 35k, which is a giant mass of jump, and why I think we use it a little bit better than, Leonorn, because Leonorn, of course, can just set Scissors to 20k, which is really intimidating, but you basically just set your grade 2s to 25, which, okay, I guess, or just 20, because most of them give themselves plus 5 anyway, so that 15. But this is so devious in Magnolia, I love it. However, I said this video was about Decklist, and I have to preface, I'm going to only show 3, just to get an idea across to people, to help people have a baseline of how to build Magnolia. Because now I have 8 when I first recorded, and now I'm up to 10. Because there's just so many small nicheities and so much more fun you can have. And honestly, I think the mirror match of Magnolia is so much more interesting than the Levy matchup ever could dream of being. So let's look at, like, what I think a Persona ride thing would look like. Obviously, the ride line is this because it's Magnolia, Sylvan Horned Beast. You want them all in drop. Works really well now with Patriarch. You might see a few cards you don't recognize. I'm proxying, which is why I'm most likely not going to share the deck list and just talk out the decks. Believe it or not, Winzapoo is not a proxy. This is generally just now a good card for Patriarch. Because let's go at it. From deck or hand, it's a grade 2, meaning you can grade 2 rush your opponent. That's pretty cool already. So, even if your opponent hits a defensive, if you're boosting this thing with a grade 1, it's a 21k attacker, meaning they still have to commit shield to guard it, or just take the damage. And we want them to take the damage because we just swing for death by 1,000 cuts. However, going off of that, if you play this on your grade 2 turn and your opponent doesn't deal with it, well, you ride into Magnolia. And this is either going to be a 23k if your opponent's grade 2, because you just placed your Vanguard, which activates the continuous, or if your opponent's grade 3, just for riding Magnolia, you went to 28k. But also, it's just a base grade 3, meaning you can discard this for ride, use Lattice, Soul Blast 1, bring it back, play it. It's just free advantage. You got the early game, you got the recursion. If you call it off of Magnolia's on place, well, it gets the power boost because it's continuous. You place the Magnolia that turn. So I honestly think Patriarch brings Winzapoo's potential out. Then, of course, we have Banatsby. Why wouldn't you? It's Counter Blast 1, Soul Blast, what you want to be doing a lot in this deck just to facilitate your drop. Revive 1. When it attacks, it gets 5k because you're a grade 3. It's a Sylvan Horned Beast that you can continuously call from drop. If your opponent's not careful, if you got them Persona rides going, well, you just got to call free 2 units. Really good. Sadly, my favorite, this GOAT, has done so much for Elder, but it's finally time to leave the deck. And I know this is a 4 of over here. I'm still playing around with the ratios. I'm pretty sure I'm going to put it down to 3, but Golbat in this deck represents this cycler, at least for Patriarch. Because you have so much more you can spend your counterblast on, like Banatsby Recall, Gwenosala, for more power. So this thing just being a free unit, or more importantly, just keeping you resource managing, it's too good to pass up. We have Gabreg, because why not? It's good. It's Soul Blast out, and is either the world's best guard restrict, or the world's worst guard restrict. It's all depending on what your opponent has on field, but like I said, more importantly, it's Soul Blast things out. Because this guy, I think like one person might actually know what this card does, or has seen it. I think this is a very obvious illusion. This is your 4 inlet. Why wouldn't you play this? It's a free 15k attacker that draws you a card and stops your opponent intercepting it during its attack. Solid card. Sadly, I think Gwenosala can go down to 2. I just like 3 so much, because if you got 3 in the back row and you get 1 trigger, that's a free 30k, even if it's 3 counterblast. You just 30k, 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 give it to another unit. Oh, it's so nice. I just want to point it out. Epnix is really good, depending on what's going around in the meta. Like, if Varga ever decides to be back, or Arista ever is a real main issue, you just throw in an Epnix or 2, and it protects your column. Because once again, don't forget, things like to disappear on Mag's board, like Sylvan Horned Inlet goes into Soul, it draws you a card. If you're playing Golbat, it retires itself, draw a card. You can intercept with Magnolia, so you just get rid of your units, and then Epnix gives protection to whatever you want to keep safe in the front row. It also just gets 10k. Of course, we're playing Apple. Why? It's a free revive, and it's one of the only things using energy. That's good in my book. Now, this thing came out before Squirrel and is your other energy blaster, which is why you don't want to use it for that Leonore Mag Cycler. But this thing works so good in tandem with literally everything in Sylvan Horn. It works good with Sorol boosting, it works great with Gnosia boost, and it's just solid by itself. Why? You attack with it. Energy Blast 3, it stands. It's not allowed to attack again, but it's now a booster, which really helps your, like, 5th attack and Magnolia just hit better numbers, because it's whatever this thing's power is. Most of the time it can be something crazy like 38, and then it's also now a 38k booster. I don't have to explain why that's really good. Because if you're in like the Levy matchup, by the way, small thing, because you're the turn player, you have priority to bounce Gwenosila's unimpeded power to any different unit. Just putting that out there. Of course, you're playing PGs. Elder could never. You're playing just the normal Elementary. Now, where you guys see Sorol, and everyone's going to jump upon, play Sorol, you need the back row bonus. You don't really. If you've played Magnolia long enough, you're just used to your opponent hits a defensive, cry. But you can still also target their rear guards or whatever left's on their board with the remaining of your attack. Of course, you can play Sorol. It's soul blasting, so once again, getting rid of the things you need in soul for recursion. And looks at top 5 for Magnolia specifically. This card came so close to being perfect. All it had to do is the things in the quotation had to be swapped. If you have a Vanguard with Magnolia, Soul Blast 1, look at top 5 for any Sylvan Horned Beast to reveal it at its hand. It wouldn't have been that broken. Or at least looking for Magnolia, look at top 7. That's all I ask. Even if this thing came from like a special set, that's the least it could have done. If it's just looking for basically one card in particular. Obviously, my favorite for Magnolia has always been Overtrigger, 7 crits, 2 fronts, 2 draws, all rest heals. It's just a fun little thing, because you don't always need a big front row. Sometimes you gotta get more card advantage, hence draws. And your back row is also a solid thing. And your front trigger doesn't give to the back row, which is normally either your bigger attackers or the ones you want to preface more. Obviously, this is a Persona Ride deck. Gradius. Because you don't really need anything else. Like, you could play some defensive blitz. I could see that. You could do, like, Angel Ladder, but you have Epnics, really, and you're intercepting with everything anyway, so there's nothing really left to protect. But overall, this is really good. You could just play this deck just as is with the few substitutions I said. Sorol is up to you. And honestly, this is once a guideline. But there's more. Wait, there's more. I could talk about Magnolia for days, and that's what I'm going to do. Because I also built an Elder version. Because now, with Patriarch, you have solid turns, turn 3 turns, where you don't immediately need to see, like, Elder or Mask to play the game. You can now have some freedom to actually do things, which I absolutely love. Which is why you only need 2 Elder. You can just sit on Patriarch for most of the game and then go for Elder once you've basically tapped your resources. So obviously, 2 Elder, Persona rides off of Patriarch. This is actually not Winzipoo, even though it's a really good card because you're playing Elder. I've been testing around with, the Deer a little bit more, and it just is more consistently good because you're not consistently placing down, Elder. So this is 28k compared to sometimes 28k. But more importantly, this can intercept and gets 5k shield, something Elder truly desperately needs. Sadly, this isn't Inlet Pulse. This is the Grade 2 Sylvan Horn Inlet. I only say that, and the reason why there's another Grade 3 in this deck outside of Patriarch is because we're still running Forbidal. It searches out Elder and plays a random grade 2 of your choosing. But this also gives you more freedom because you can also grab, Elder, use Soul Blast for cost, or just discard during your ride phase. Back to hand with Forbidal, next turn just slap it on down. You're basically doing the same thing, except now you don't have to pay a counterblast and you're taking things out of Soul. Maximize Banat speed. Why? Because this thing went from call 1 to call 3. Have 3 on board, so yeah, too good to ignore. Unlike before, this is actually Goldabat. Because you're playing Elder, if you place 1, have 2 of these, you've cycled 2, and you've gotten so much card draw. Once again, everything you basically see here, except for Sorol, which once again is this lovely lady who says card draw set things to 15 in Elder, which doesn't seem like it would be effective, but it really just helps Sorol, instead of swinging for 25k, swing for 30k, because you're setting him base to 15 plus 5 from Elder plus 10 from his own effect, which really does make a difference, especially if your opponent's at like 1 damage and getting low on hand advantage. This is something they might just have to take. But if, you're only swinging for 25, that's still triggered a guard. I know front trigger math still F's this card over, but there's only so much you can humanly do. You're mainly just playing it for the early game card advantage anyway. And of course, you gotta switch Elementaries up because you're a grade 4. Outside of that, this deck is just really solid, and I love Elder. But now for the black sheep of the family, in my opinion, because if you've heard me talk before, I have a strong dislike of Magnolia Masques. Even though it was like the strongest probably later in the game. I hated the Masque engine. Everything just felt way too clunky, and if you didn't see a Masque, you basically lost the game because you were on base Elt, like Magnolia. And that's just something you can't afford to have happen. Even with like Sorol looking and your Masque, it's just not enough. However, Patriarch fixes everything. Like, I actually struggled to put cards in the deck, which I didn't think would be possible ever in Masque history. But if anything could sway me to actually play this deck, it's actually Patriarch. Because once again, you get so much choices. Obviously, you're running at least 2 versions of Patriarch, all in on Dragon Tree stuff, because just a free cost. Really nice. This thing, in theory, says Revive 5, Revive 4, but it really realistically only calls 3 from my experience, and even then my board is really tough. Place your Dragon Tree marker, get Masque, countercharge specifically, but also as a really nice shield. The only thing really using your energy in this, because you need more Revive consistently than just Force Grow. Hey, surprise, surprise, this is actually Sorol. Because that continuous is now double-sided. You're playing both Patriarch and Magnolia Masque. Both of these things Persona Ride. And because of how Masque works, late game, you're basically playing Omni Gruzio. Because Patriarch Persona Rides, you get rid of Masque, you go into it, hey, your opponent's grade 3, activate Persona Ride. So this should more than not always be active, and it's really cool that way. Especially with the interaction where you can Soul Blast out Patriarch if you play this afterwards. Because it's just a free Soul Blast cost, which is why you can play so many Soul Blast heavy things. Because you're just going to bind it for, Magnolia Masque. It's a very beautiful interaction, and I love it so much. We're playing Deer, mainly because you can recycle your orders, which is really helpful. Why? I'm very dubious. Some of you eagle-eyed viewers might realize there's Wandering Souls. This is one of my favorite orders, Yi. Because you discard an order, your Vanguard gets drive +1. Why is this massive? Well, if you Persona Road with Patriarch, you're now getting quad drive. Drive +2, baby. Which is terrifying, but also you basically turned Magnolia Masques into Patriarch because it's getting a drive +1. And oh no, your back row's basically getting +25k because it's on Dragon Tray markers and you have Sorol in the back row. And anything that attacks from back row is going to retire something your opponent has. And it's the only time I've really changed up my trigger lineup for draws because you just need to see your pieces more consistently in Masque. Then you do need to have like a front trigger shield value because it's being replaced by Maleev over here. So, really just great in the long run because you can just basically ditch Masque, Mag Masque, Patriarch, or even Gratis because, hey, guess what? Lattice adds it back. So once again, it's just that concept of free value. And you might all be wondering why Yi out of every single order like Mythiarch to give you consistency. Well, Dry +1 is your consistency now. And because you're already playing Bison over here, because you need the Dragon Tray markers, you might as well just use its other effect. And because you have so much soul recursion, just off of the Persona rides you're doing and shoving Masque back into soul, well, you basically, once again, free value that soul. And hey, this adds an order. Even if you're just playing 2, once you already have one Masque running, the other one's kind of dead in your hand. So Bison can add back a Wandering Souls you've already played. It can, because Gratis doesn't bind itself, well, that's just an order always sitting in drop. Add it back to hand, throw it away for Yi. Like, there's a lot of potential now, and I've play tested these a little bit, and it's just actually feels so much better. Because the concept is, in all of Magnolia's history, you were playing Elder, you were playing Mag Masque, not as your finishers, but as your gameplay. But if you didn't find them, you basically lost the game. Now with Patriarch, you have a turn outside of them, which pivots their role from playing the game to closers, to something that accentuates your play, which is a big difference even if it's such a subtle role change. So once again, just giving Elder a grade 3 body has changed literally everything about this deck, and I couldn't be happier. And please, let me know if you need like deck building help or want to just know some of the other decks I built, because I would just love to gab about them. Magnolia has really returned back to his king shit of like set 4, which is ironic because this is coming in set 8, which is not exactly set 8 from the old, but it's in Divines. It took so long, but hey, multiples of 4s. So once again, just looking over all of these, it's just so creative. It's just so nice. It blends so well together. You get massive hands, and you basically always have a free board, no matter which variant you play. My favorite, just because I'm biased, is Elder. But even if you want to just play the basic, just Persona Ride version, note, if you don't find your Persona Ride, it still kind of hurts, because you're not getting big enough attacks, which is just the normal Magnolia play, but more importantly, you're not getting the dry +1, so you've lost a lot more pressure. But honestly, I think I could just blab about these decks more, but I should probably cut myself off here before the rambling really gets bad. But before I do, just note that because of, Patriarch going on a small tangent, a lot of uncommon Sylvan Horn just become a lot more popular. Like, things I would never see myself playing. Some prime examples. Like, hey, Kushi right here, 30k attacker with Sorol, and its only restriction is it just got to be placed behind your Vanguard. That's not really hard to accomplish, and even if this thing hits the drop zone, alright, call Mag, play it back. Hey, I don't want to attack with it. 30k booster. Deal with it. But there's also just a lot of other things people haven't, like, thought of. Like, when's the last time you've seen this lemur? Probably if you watched my tier list, or I guess played against Megami, like, in Deer Days 1. She sometimes plays this. But, like, you would never see it coming because it's a 5k base. And all in the front row, whenever another rearguard's attacks, it gets plus 5k. And you can counterblast one to give it another 5k. Well, hey, that's not too bad in Patriarch now. Because if your opponent's grade 3, this is a 10k. You attack one rear, 15. Another, 20. You still got 2 more attacks, so it's a 30k attacker. That's not a bad number, considering you haven't Persona Road. If you do, it's a 40k attacker. Like, no one's going to see you play this tech. And if you're just slightly out of reach during one of those, you can just counterblast one, give it 5k. That went to 45. You want to do it again? This isn't a once per turn, it's now a 50k attacker. Like, there's a lot more Sylvan Horn I could just show off, just going, look at how bigger it gets, look how better it gets. Like, it's insane. But once again, this is a tangent. That would be a tangent at this point. I just wanted to basically show off some general ideas for a deck. I wanted to show off the support. And I, more importantly, want to hear everyone's thoughts. Like, what are you building? How do you plan to do it? Eventually, when these come to deck log, I'll make deck codes. If you made it this far past the video to hear this, thank you. Probably not a lot of you would. But I love Magnolia so much. Bushy Road gave me one of the greatest gifts ever they ever could. And I'm going to be a menace again with Magnolia.